Savannah Guthrie is waking up to a nightmare no daughter ever expects. The Today Show anchor's name is suddenly tied to a police investigation in Arizona, after reports surfaced that her 84-year-old mother, Nancy Guthrie, vanished from her home under deeply suspicious circumstances. And within hours of that news breaking, authorities acknowledged they were aware of reports about a possible ransom demand connected to the case. That reaction, quiet, controlled, and painfully restrained, is where this story begins. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Because while Savannah Guthrie has not spoken publicly about the alleged ransom note, law enforcement in Arizona has confirmed they are taking the claim seriously enough to involve federal authorities. The Pima County Sheriff's Office said it is aware of circulating reports about possible ransom communication, and that anything received is being passed directly to detectives coordinating with the FBI. That's not a rumor response. That's a law enforcement reaction. And it instantly transforms this from a missing person case into something far darker, far more complicated, and far more urgent. Nancy Guthrie, Savannah's mother, was last seen at her home in the Catalina foothills area near Tucson. Family members reportedly realized something was wrong when she failed to show up for a church commitment, a routine part of her life. That detail matters. Because when someone with established habits suddenly breaks routine without explanation, investigators don't call it coincidence. They call it a red flag. Then came the next layer. Authorities said they found very concerning evidence inside the home, enough to officially classify the house as a crime scene. Reports indicate signs of forced entry, and blood were discovered. Yet Nancy's phone, wallet, and vehicle were still there. No sign of a rushed departure. No evidence she left on her own. Just absence. Sudden and unexplained. And then, as if the case wasn't already chilling enough, a message allegedly arrived at TMZ claiming to be a ransom note. The note reportedly demanded millions of dollars in Bitcoin and referenced specific items connected to Nancy's home. Details that raised eyebrows because they suggested inside knowledge. But here's the key. Authorities have not confirmed the note is authentic. It could be real. It could be a hoax. It could be a cruel attempt to exploit a family's crisis for attention. But investigators can't ignore it. Because even a fake ransom note can point to someone watching the case closely, or someone who knows more than they should. Think about that for a second. A public figure's elderly mother disappears. Evidence inside the home suggests a struggle, and instead of contacting the family directly, someone allegedly sends a multi-million-dollar crypto demand to a media outlet. Why? Why go public before going personal? Why involve the press before making contact with loved ones? Those questions are now hanging over every part of this investigation. The sheriff's office has been careful with its words. They haven't labeled this a kidnapping. They haven't confirmed a ransom situation. They haven't named suspects or motives. But they have confirmed this. Something happened inside that house that should not have happened. Something serious enough that local detectives are now working alongside federal agents. And time is not a luxury in this case. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. Officials have said she has limited mobility and requires daily medication that she cannot safely go without. That detail shifts the emotional gravity of this case. This is not just about solving a crime. It's about a race against the clock. Every hour that passes matters. Every lead that doesn't pan out adds pressure. Every unverified claim creates noise investigators must filter through. Meanwhile, Savannah Guthrie, a journalist known for asking difficult questions on national television, is now on the other side of the story. According to reports from Variety, her representatives have declined to comment on the ransom note claims. That silence isn't suspicious. It's human. When families are in crisis, public statements often give way to private desperation. But the public spotlight doesn't turn off just because a family needs privacy. Viewers recognize Savannah. They see her on morning television. They know her voice, her presence, her professionalism. And now they know that behind the scenes, she may be living through every family's worst fear, waiting for news that doesn't come fast enough. That emotional contrast is part of why the story has exploded beyond Arizona. It's not just a crime investigation. It's a human story unfolding in real time, involving someone millions of people feel like they know. But here's where the mystery deepens. Investigators have reportedly said they don't currently believe this follows the pattern of a typical robbery, home invasion, or traditional kidnapping for ransom plot. That statement is subtle but powerful. It means detectives see something about the evidence, the scene, or the circumstances that doesn't match the usual playbook. So, if it's not typical, what is it? Was Nancy targeted? Did someone know her routine? Was this random or personal? And how does the alleged Bitcoin ransom demand fit into that picture, if it fits at all? These are the questions investigators are chasing right now, using tools most of us never see. Detectives are reviewing surveillance footage from nearby homes and streets. They're analyzing mobile phone tower data to see what devices were in the area. They're checking license plate reader systems to identify vehicles that shouldn't have been there. They're processing DNA evidence collected at the scene, hoping for a match that could point to a suspect. But investigations don't unfold like TV shows. There's no instant breakthrough, no dramatic reveal in 42 minutes. Instead, there are long hours of data, cross-checks, and waiting for lab results that may or may not provide answers. And while law enforcement works methodically, the public watches anxiously, because right now we know just enough to be alarmed, and not enough to feel reassured. We know Nancy Guthrie is missing. We know her home is a crime scene. We know authorities are treating reports of a ransom demand seriously, even if they haven't verified it. We know federal agents are involved. And we know time is critical due to her medical needs. What we don't know is where she is, who may have taken her, or why. That uncertainty is the weight hanging over this story. For Savannah Guthrie, this isn't a headline. It's her mother. For investigators, it's a case that grows more complex by the day. And for the public, it's a mystery that feels both distant and deeply personal at the same time. Because stories like this break through our normal defenses. They remind us how quickly ordinary life can shatter. One evening, everything is routine. The next morning, someone is gone. And every unanswered call becomes a source of dread. Right now, detectives are following every tip, every lead, every possibility. No matter how small, they have to. In cases involving vulnerable adults, you don't get to dismiss anything too quickly. And that brings us to the next turning point. Because the alleged ransom message wasn't just a shocking development, it may have shifted the entire direction of the investigation. Whether it's real, fake, or something in between, it forces detectives to consider new motives, new suspects, and new scenarios. So the question now isn't just what happened inside Nancy Guthrie's home. The question is what investigators are doing next, and whether one of those next steps could finally bring the break this case desperately needs. Savannah Guthrie is still waiting for answers, and now investigators are reacting to something that could either be a breakthrough or a dangerous distraction. Detectives in Arizona aren't just searching neighborhoods and scanning surveillance anymore. They're now trying to determine whether a message sent to a media outlet is a real ransom demand tied to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, or a cruel hoax that's muddying the waters. That reaction, cautious, methodical, and urgent, is driving the next phase of this case. Because the alleged note didn't arrive quietly. It reportedly landed in the inbox of a major celebrity news outlet, claiming Nancy had been taken and demanding millions of dollars in Bitcoin, not cash. Not a phone call. Cryptocurrency. Anonymous. Hard to trace. Built for secrecy. Investigators didn't roll their eyes and dismiss it. They couldn't afford to. Instead, law enforcement confirmed they are aware of the reports, and that anything related is being funneled directly to detectives working alongside federal authorities. That's the kind of response reserved for something that might be real, or at least dangerous enough to take seriously. But here's where it gets strange. If someone truly abducted Nancy Guthrie for ransom, why send the demand to a news outlet instead of her family? Why make it public before making it personal? Kidnappers typically want quiet negotiations, not headlines that bring national attention and federal agencies into the picture. So what does that tell us? It tells us either the sender doesn't understand how ransom crimes usually work, or they never intended to collect money in the first place. That possibility changes everything. Because a fake ransom demand isn't just a prank, it's interference in an active investigation. It can redirect resources, create false hope, and put emotional pressure on a family already living in fear. Detectives now have to treat the message like evidence. They have to trace where it came from, analyze the language, check the digital trail, and determine whether any details inside match facts that were never released publicly. That last part is key. Reports say the note referenced specific items connected to Nancy's home, including something that had been damaged. If that detail turns out to be accurate, and not something guessed from public reports. It could suggest the sender has inside knowledge. That's the line investigators are walking right now. Coincidence? Copycat? Or connection? And while they sort through that, the clock keeps ticking. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. Her medical needs haven't changed. Her family still doesn't know where she is. Savannah Guthrie still wakes up each day without answers. Every new development brings a surge of hope followed by another wave of uncertainty. Imagine being in that position. Every time the phone rings, your heart jumps. Every news alert feels personal. Every rumor online becomes something you wish you could ignore but can't. That's the emotional reality running parallel to the investigation. Meanwhile, detectives are dissecting the alleged ransom message piece by piece. Cryptocurrency demands aren't new, but they're still complicated. Investigators have to analyze the Bitcoin address included in the message. Has it been used before? Is it connected to known criminal activity? Was it created recently? Are there transactions linked to it? Each of those questions could point toward a suspect, or prove the whole thing is a smokescreen. And here's another layer: the timing. The message reportedly surfaced after authorities had already labeled Nancy's home a crime scene. That means whoever sent it was following the news closely. They knew the disappearance was public. They knew fear was rising. They knew the story had traction. So did they see an opportunity? Was this an attempt to insert themselves into a high-profile case? Or is it exactly what it claims to be? A desperate criminal making demands while law enforcement closes in. Right now, investigators can't assume either scenario. They have to pursue both. This is where cases like this become mental chess matches. Detectives aren't just looking for physical evidence. They're trying to understand behavior. What kind of person sends a ransom demand to the media? What kind of criminal uses cryptocurrency but draws national attention? What kind of offender leaves behind a crime scene with signs of forced entry and blood, yet doesn't make direct contact with the family? Each of those questions points to different psychological profiles, different motives, different risk levels for the victim, and the answers aren't obvious. What we do know is that law enforcement is coordinating at multiple levels. Local detectives handle the ground investigation. Federal agents bring technical resources and experience with complex crimes. Digital analysts examine the online trail. Forensic teams process physical evidence. All of it happening at once, behind closed doors while the public sees only fragments. That's why updates feel slow, because real investigations don't move at the speed of social media. Still, every new detail matters. The fact that the alleged note includes a deadline raises the stakes. Even if investigators doubt its authenticity, they can't gamble with a life. They have to treat the timeline seriously. That means working around the clock, prioritizing any lead that might connect to the message, and preparing for the possibility that more communication could follow. And that's another question hanging in the air. Will there be another message? If the sender is watching coverage, they know authorities have acknowledged the reports. They know the note is under scrutiny. Do they escalate? Do they go silent? Do they attempt direct contact next? Each possibility leads to a different investigative path. For Savannah Guthrie and her family, this is a nightmare unfolding in stages. First, the shock of realizing Nancy was missing. Then the horror of learning her home was a crime scene. Now the psychological torment of a possible ransom demand that may or may not be real. It's emotional whiplash. And yet, investigators have to stay detached. They can't chase hope. They can't chase fear. They chase facts. Right now, the biggest fact is this: the alleged ransom message exists, and it's being analyzed. It may hold clues. It may be worthless noise. But until they know which, it remains central to the case. So while the public debates and speculates, detectives are asking very specific questions. Who sent it? Where did it originate? What do they know that hasn't been made public? And what are they going to do next if the deadline mentioned in that message gets closer? Because that's the turning point investigators are approaching right now. The moment when they have to decide whether the alleged ransom demand is a side story or the key to finding Nancy Guthrie. And the next move they make could change the entire direction of this investigation. Nancy Guthrie is still missing, and now investigators are reacting to what they found inside her home. The discovery that officially transformed a missing person case into a criminal investigation. While Savannah Guthrie waits for answers no daughter should ever have to wait for, detectives are focused on a scene they described as deeply concerning. a scene that suggests Nancy didn't simply walk out the door. Because inside that house, something happened. Authorities have been careful with their wording, but the message is clear. There were signs of forced entry. There was blood. And there was no sign of Nancy. That combination is what changed everything. Up until that point, this could have been treated as a welfare check that turned into a search. An elderly woman doesn't answer her phone. She misses an appointment. Family members worry. Police knock on the door. That's a familiar pattern. But forced entry and blood don't fit that pattern. They signal struggle. They signal violence. They signal that whatever happened was not voluntary. Investigators processing the home in the Catalina foothills area treated it like a full crime scene. That means photographs, measurements, evidence markers, gloves, bags, swabs. The meticulous, slow work that happens when every inch of a location could hold a clue. It's not dramatic. It's not fast. But it's how cases are built. And here's what makes this scene even more unsettling. Nancy's essential items were still there. Her phone. Her wallet. Her vehicle. If someone plans to leave, even in a confused or distressed state, they often take something. A purse, keys, a phone. Here, those anchors to everyday life were left behind. So what does that suggest? It suggests she didn't have time. It suggests she didn't have control. It suggests that if she left that house, it wasn't by choice. That's the reality investigators are working from right now. Sheriff Chris Nanos has said there were things inside the home that were very concerning. That phrase may sound measured, but in law enforcement language it carries weight. Officials don't use it lightly. It means the evidence they saw immediately raised red flags about foul play, and yet, even with those red flags, the scene doesn't tell a complete story. Blood at a scene is alarming, but it doesn't automatically answer the biggest questions. How much was there? Where was it located? Was it tested immediately? Does it belong to Nancy? Could it belong to someone else? Each of those answers leads the investigation in a different direction. Forensic teams would have moved quickly to collect samples. Blood can provide DNA. DNA can identify a victim, confirm injury, or potentially point to a suspect. But lab results don't come back in an hour. They take time, careful analysis, comparisons against databases, cross-checks to avoid mistakes. While those tests run, detectives have to piece together the physical layout of what happened. Where was the forced entry? A door? A window? Was it broken inward or outward? Was the lock damaged? Those details might seem small, but they can reveal whether someone came in from outside, or whether the scene was staged to look like a break-in. Investigators will examine tool marks, splinter patterns, and the direction of damage. Crime scenes are puzzles, and every fragment matters. And then there's the question of timing. When did this happen? Nancy was last seen the evening of January 31st. Family became concerned when she didn't show up for a church commitment. That creates a window, a span of hours where something occurred inside that home, unseen and unheard by the outside world. Detectives will work to narrow that window. They'll check when neighbors last saw lights on, when deliveries arrived, when security cameras nearby captured movement. They'll look for anything that pins down the moment routine turned into crisis. Because once you know when something happened, you can start asking who was there. Another haunting element of this case is Nancy's physical condition. Officials have said she has limited mobility and requires daily medication. That changes how investigators interpret the scene. A physically limited person is less likely to put up a prolonged fight, less likely to flee quickly, less likely to leave without assistance, which raises a painful possibility. She may have been overpowered quickly. It's a thought no family wants to face. And yet, it's one investigators cannot ignore. Inside that house, detectives aren't just looking for evidence of a crime. They're looking for signs of direction, drag marks, disturbances in furniture, items out of place. Anything that shows movement, where Nancy might have been, and where she might have been taken. At the same time, they're working to determine whether the scene was interrupted. Did the suspect leave in a hurry? Did they clean up anything? Did they take something specific? Missing objects can be just as telling as broken ones. And here's another layer. Not all evidence is visible. Investigators use chemical agents and special lighting to reveal traces that can't be seen with the naked eye. Footprints, handprints, fibers, hair. Each microscopic detail could link someone to that home. But here's the frustrating truth. Crime scenes often raise more questions than they answer. Yes, there was forced entry. But was it the point of entry? Or a staged exit? Yes, there was blood. But was it from an injury that happened there? Or could it have been transferred? Yes. Nancy is gone. But was she taken directly from the home? Or moved somewhere else first? Every answer opens another branch of possibilities. Meanwhile, Savannah Guthrie is living with the reality that the place her mother felt safest has become a forensic grid. Yellow tape. Evidence markers. Strangers cataloging the last known environment of someone she loves. That emotional weight is impossible to measure. And the public feels it too. Because homes are supposed to be safe, especially for elderly people. When violence invades that space, it shakes something deep in all of us. That's part of why this story has resonated so widely. It's not just about a well-known family. It's about vulnerability. About routine shattered. About the terrifying idea that an ordinary evening can turn into a crime scene overnight. Right now, detectives are reconstructing those final hours inside Nancy Guthrie's home, step by step, what she was doing, where she might have been in the house. What signs show interruption? What signs show resistance? And they're pairing that physical evidence with something just as important. The digital trail outside those walls. Because if someone forced their way in, they had to arrive somehow. A vehicle. A phone. A presence in the area that didn't belong. Which is why the investigation is about to move beyond the house itself and into the invisible web of data that surrounds all of us every day. Cameras. Cell towers. License plate readers. The digital footprints that might reveal who came near Nancy's home. And who left in a hurry. And what investigators find in that digital net could be the next major move in this case. Savannah Guthrie is still searching for answers about her mother, and now investigators are reacting to something that never sleeps, never blinks, and never forgets. Digital evidence. While Nancy Guthrie remains missing, and the scene inside her home raises haunting questions, detectives are turning outward, casting a wide net into the invisible data trails that surround modern life. Because if someone came to that house, they likely left a digital shadow. And that's where the investigation moves next. The moment law enforcement determined Nancy's home was a crime scene, the focus expanded beyond walls and door frames. Detectives began mapping the environment around the house in the Catalina foothills, looking for anything that recorded movement during the critical window when Nancy disappeared. Security cameras are the first stop. Not just doorbell cameras. Not just home surveillance. But traffic cams, business cameras, community systems. Any lens that might have captured a vehicle slowing down, stopping, or leaving the area at an unusual hour. Footage doesn't just show suspects. It shows patterns. A car circling the block. Headlights at a time when most homes are dark. A vehicle parked where it normally wouldn't be. Investigators gather hours and hours of video, sometimes days worth, and then they start the slow process of review. It's tedious. It's exhausting. But one frame can change everything. And cameras are only one piece. Cell phone tower data is another powerful tool. Every mobile phone, even when not actively in use, communicates with nearby towers. Investigators can analyze which devices connected to towers near Nancy's home during the time frame they believe the incident occurred. The goal isn't to spy on innocent people. It's to find anomalies, devices that appeared in the area but don't belong to residents, phones that pinged briefly and then vanished. Signals that moved in a pattern suggesting arrival and rapid departure. Each unknown device becomes a lead. But here's the challenge. Urban and suburban areas are dense with signals. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of phones pass through a single tower's range in a day. Sorting through that data is like finding a needle in a digital haystack. So, detectives cross-reference. If a suspicious vehicle appears on camera at 10:42 p.m., they check which devices were nearby at that exact minute. If a phone leaves the area quickly afterward, they trace where it goes next. Patterns start to form. And sometimes those patterns point directly to a suspect. Then there are license plate readers. Many communities now use automated systems that photograph and log plates as vehicles pass certain points. Intersections, highways, neighborhood entrances. Investigators can pull records to see which vehicles traveled near Nancy's home during the critical window. Most will be ordinary. Neighbors. Delivery trucks, people passing through. But one unfamiliar plate at the wrong time can become the key. This is where modern investigations become part detective work, part data science. Algorithms help flag anomalies. Analysts help interpret results. But human judgment still guides the process. Because not every odd data point means guilt. Maybe a delivery driver took a wrong turn. Maybe a lost tourist drove through. Maybe someone's phone signal bounced unexpectedly. Investigators have to separate coincidence from connection. And they have to do it while time keeps pressing down. Nancy Guthrie's medical needs haven't paused. Her family's fear hasn't eased. Savannah Guthrie still doesn't know where her mother is or what condition she might be in. That urgency fuels every decision detectives make. They aren't just looking backward, they're looking forward. If a suspect vehicle is identified, where did it go? Did it stop somewhere remote? Did it travel out of state? Did it return to a known address? If a suspicious phone is tracked, who owns it? Is it tied to someone with a criminal history? Someone connected to Nancy? Someone completely unknown? Each digital lead opens a path that investigators follow step by step. But here's the unsettling part. The absence of evidence can be evidence too. If no suspicious vehicles appear on camera, that suggests planning. If no unfamiliar phones show up, that suggests caution. Or someone who knew how to avoid leaving a trail. Criminals don't have to be experts to be lucky. But sometimes they are more careful than expected. And that possibility forces investigators to consider another angle. Did someone Nancy knew come to the house? Because a familiar vehicle wouldn't stand out? A known phone wouldn't look suspicious. A trusted visitor wouldn't raise alarms. That's the question detectives quietly ask in cases like this. Was this random? Or personal? Was Nancy targeted because of who she was connected to? Because of something she had? Or because of someone she knew? Investigators look into recent contacts, visitors, service workers, anyone who had access to the home or knowledge of Nancy's routine. They review call logs, appointments, and interactions in the days leading up to her disappearance. And here's where routine becomes critical. Nancy was known to attend church regularly. Her absence there was one of the first warning signs. Did anyone there notice someone watching? Did she mention anything unusual? Did anyone see a strange car near her home in the days before? Sometimes the smallest memory unlocks the biggest lead. A neighbor recalling headlights at an odd hour. A passerby remembering a vehicle parked where it didn't belong. A delivery driver noticing a door ajar. Investigators rely on the public more than many people realize. That's why law enforcement often asks for tips, even when they can't share details. They're hoping someone, somewhere, saw something that felt off at the time, but didn't seem important until now. Meanwhile, Savannah Guthrie is living in the space between updates, between hope and dread. Each development, the crime scene, the alleged ransom note, the digital search, adds information but not answers. It's a waiting game no family ever wants to play. And the public watches alongside her, trying to piece together clues from the outside, while the real work happens behind closed doors. Right now, detectives are building a timeline not just of Nancy's last known movements, but of everything that moved around her home in that critical window. Cars, phones, people, signals. They're asking, who entered that space, and who left? Because somewhere in that web of data is the next step, the next direction, the next move investigators will make in the effort to find Nancy Guthrie and bring clarity to a case that still has more questions than answers. And that next move may depend on narrowing down the final hours before she vanished. The last confirmed moments of her routine life before everything changed. Savannah Guthrie is still waiting, and investigators are now reacting to the most personal part of this case. Nancy Guthrie's final known hours before she disappeared. Before the crime scene tape. Before the alleged ransom message. Before the national headlines. There was just an 84-year-old woman at home, following what should have been an ordinary routine. And somewhere inside that routine, something went terribly wrong. Nancy was last seen the evening of January 31st, at her home in the Catalina foothills near Tucson. That's the anchor point in this timeline. The last confirmed moment she was safe, in her own space, living her normal life. After that, everything becomes uncertainty. Investigators are now reconstructing that window hour by hour. What was she doing that evening? Did she speak to anyone on the phone? Did she text? Did she turn lights on or off at a specific time? These aren't small questions. They help detectives determine when her routine stopped and when danger entered the picture. Because routine is predictable. Nancy was known to attend church regularly. She had commitments. People expected her to show up. When she didn't arrive, that's when alarm bells started ringing. A church contact reportedly reached out to family to say she was missing. That means her absence was noticeable quickly, which narrows the timeline. But what happened between that last normal evening and the moment someone realized she was gone? Investigators look at household clues first. Was the television on? Dishes in the sink? A book left open? These details help determine whether Nancy settled in for the night or was interrupted mid-evening. A life pause mid-action can speak volumes. Then there's communication. Detectives will examine her phone records. When was her last outgoing call? Last incoming call? Last text? Even unanswered calls matter. If someone tried to reach her and it went straight to voicemail, that can signal when the phone was turned off or taken. Her phone being left at the house is another chilling piece of this puzzle. It means if she was taken, she was separated from her lifeline to the outside world. No way to call for help, no way to signal distress. That suggests speed, control, a situation that escalated quickly. And then there's the medical factor. Authorities have said Nancy requires daily medication that she could die without. That detail turns the timeline into something more urgent than just investigative. Well, it becomes a survival clock. Investigators don't just want to know when she disappeared. They need to know how long she could realistically endure without medical support. Every hour counts differently in a case like this. Detectives are also asking whether anyone else interacted with Nancy that day. Did she have a visitor? A service appointment? A delivery? Someone at the door in the hours before she vanished? Even a brief interaction can open a line of inquiry. Because if someone targeted her, they may have observed her routine first. Was she alone often? Did she answer the door without hesitation? Did she have predictable habits? Criminals who prey on vulnerable adults often rely on familiarity with those patterns. But investigators can't jump to that conclusion without evidence. They also have to consider randomness, a crime of opportunity, someone passing through, someone who saw an open window or darkened porch and made a split-second decision. Which is more likely? Planned or spontaneous? Targeted or random? Each possibility leads to different suspects, different motives, and different chances of Nancy still being alive. And here's another painful angle investigators have to consider. Could Nancy have known her attacker? A known visitor wouldn't raise alarms. She might open the door willingly. She might not sense danger until it was too late. That's why detectives look closely at anyone who had recent contact. Friends, acquaintances, service providers, even distant connections. They aren't accusing. They're mapping relationships. Meanwhile, Savannah Guthrie is living with the knowledge that the last moments of her mother's normal life are now under a microscope. Every detail analyzed. Every minute dissected. That's emotionally brutal, but it's necessary. Because somewhere in those final hours is the pivot point. The moment routine became crisis. Investigators try to pinpoint when that moment occurred. If neighbors heard something unusual, a bang, a shout, a car door at an odd time, they canvass door to door, asking people to rewind their memories. Most will say they noticed nothing. But sometimes, one person remembers a small, strange detail that cracks a case open. A light on at 2 a.m., a vehicle idling, a dog barking at an unusual hour. These fragments matter. At the same time, detectives examine Nancy's recent history. Had she expressed fear? Mentioned someone bothering her? Experienced recent scams or suspicious contacts? Elderly individuals are often targeted by fraud schemes that can escalate into something more serious. But again, there's no public evidence pointing clearly in that direction. At least not yet. Right now, the timeline remains a skeleton waiting to be filled in. Last seen the evening of January 31st. Missed church commitment. Family alerted. Crime scene discovered. The gap in between is where the truth lives. And that gap is what investigators are racing to close. Because the sooner they understand exactly when Nancy disappeared, the better they can align digital evidence, surveillance footage, and witness accounts. Time isn't just a number. It's a filter. Narrow it enough, and the list of possibilities shrinks. For Savannah, That timeline isn't abstract. It's the last night her mother was safe. The last hours she might have spoken to someone. The last window where intervention might have been possible. That weight sits heavy. And now investigators are turning to the next crucial decision point, one that could redefine the entire case. Because despite the alleged ransom message, authorities have been cautious about calling this a traditional kidnapping, and understanding why they're hesitant may reveal more about what they believe really happened. Savannah Guthrie is still waiting for clarity, and investigators are now reacting to a critical decision in this case. Their hesitation to call Nancy Guthrie's disappearance a traditional kidnapping. While the public hears ransom note and immediately thinks abduction for money, law enforcement is signaling something different, something more complicated, and possibly more troubling. Because if this were a typical kidnapping for ransom, the playbook would look very different. In classic ransom cases, the first priority for criminals is control and communication. They make direct contact with the family. They set terms. They keep negotiations private to avoid law enforcement involvement. They want money, and they want it quietly. But that's not what happened here. The alleged ransom demand surfaced through a media outlet, not through Nancy's family. There's been no confirmed direct contact with loved ones demanding payment. Authorities haven't described ongoing negotiations. That alone sets off alarms for investigators. Not the kind the public hears, but the analytical kind that shape how a case is classified. So what does that mean? It means detectives are asking whether money was ever the real motive. When sheriff's officials say they don't currently believe this fits a traditional kidnapping for ransom plot, they aren't downplaying the seriousness. They're signaling that the evidence at the scene, the lack of direct family contact, and the overall behavior pattern don't align with criminals whose primary goal is cash. That shifts the investigative lens. If not ransom, then what? Could the alleged Bitcoin demand be a smokescreen? A distraction planted after the fact to make the crime look financially motivated? That possibility forces investigators to consider that the message may have been sent by someone trying to mislead them, or by someone inserting themselves into the story for attention. But there's another possibility too. Some crimes start one way and evolve another. An offender might not begin with the intention of kidnapping. A confrontation could escalate. A burglary could turn violent. A personal dispute could spiral out of control. In those scenarios, a later ransom demand might be an attempt to retroactively create a financial narrative, to buy time, to confuse, to redirect. Investigators have to weigh all of it. And while they do, Savannah Guthrie is living in the uncertainty of not knowing what category her mother's disappearance even falls into. That's a different kind of torment. Not just where is she, but why did this happen? And what are we really dealing with? Those questions haunt families in complex cases. Law enforcement also considers risk patterns. Traditional ransom kidnappers usually keep victims alive because they see them as assets. Harm reduces leverage. But if this case doesn't match that model, investigators have to consider darker motivations, motives that don't rely on negotiation. That's why officials are careful with their language. They don't want to create false hope. But they also can't shut down possibilities prematurely. And here's another layer complicating things. Nancy Guthrie's vulnerability. An 84-year-old woman with limited mobility and medical needs doesn't fit the typical high-value ransom target profile. Criminals seeking millions usually target individuals with known access to wealth, not necessarily elderly relatives of public figures. That doesn't make it impossible, just less typical. So detectives ask, was Nancy the intended target? Or was she the accessible one? Was this about proximity rather than identity? If someone wanted to hurt, intimidate, or manipulate someone connected to her, targeting Nancy could be a way to do that. That possibility is chilling. But investigators must consider it. They also examine whether this could be a crime driven by something other than money or personal connection. Something like mental instability, fixation, or random violence. Not every crime follows a logical, profit-driven path. Meanwhile, the public narrative keeps circling back to the ransom angle because it's dramatic and concrete. A number. A deadline. Cryptocurrency. It sounds like a movie plot, but investigators live in the gray space where stories don't follow scripts. And that gray space is where this case currently sits. There's also the matter of what hasn't happened. No verified proof of life message has been announced. In many ransom cases, criminals provide evidence the victim is alive to increase pressure. The absence of that detail is significant. It doesn't mean the worst has happened, but it does influence how detectives assess the situation. At the same time, law enforcement must protect the integrity of the investigation. There may be communications or evidence they're withholding to avoid tipping off a suspect. Silence in public doesn't always mean absence in private. But from the outside, the uncertainty is agonizing. Savannah Guthrie, known for maintaining composure in high-pressure news environments, now faces a deeply personal crisis unfolding in slow motion. Each official statement is parsed, each word weighed, each omission noticed, and investigators feel that pressure too. They know the nation is watching. They know the family is waiting. They know every decision they make could either bring them closer to Nancy or push a suspect further away. That's why classification matters. Calling something a kidnapping too early can lock investigators into a path that misses other motives. Ignoring a ransom demand can be equally dangerous. So they walk the line, treating every possibility as real until evidence rules it out. Right now, the working reality is this: Nancy Guthrie is missing under suspicious circumstances. Her home shows signs of a struggle. An alleged ransom message exists but remains unverified. And the motive is still an open question. That uncertainty is the center of this case. Because until detectives understand why this happened, it's harder to predict what the person responsible might do next. Will they reach out again? Will they make a mistake? Will a digital trail finally light up? Or will a witness step forward with the one detail that shifts everything? Investigators are now moving toward a decision point, one that could determine whether they treat the alleged ransom demand as a central lead or a secondary thread. And that decision will shape what they do next in the search for Nancy Guthrie. Savannah Guthrie is waking up every day and walking into a television studio, while her personal life is suspended in uncertainty. And that reality is shaping how investigators, the media, and the public are reacting to this case. While detectives work behind the scenes to determine what happened to Nancy Guthrie, Savannah's visible silence has become a powerful emotional undercurrent in the story. Because this isn't just a missing person investigation. It's a daughter going on live television while not knowing where her mother is. Savannah Guthrie, the longtime co-anchor of The Today, is known for composure under pressure. She's reported on tragedies, breaking news, and global crises. She's asked tough questions of world leaders and comforted guests through emotional interviews. But now, she's living a story she cannot control, cannot report on freely, and cannot emotionally distance herself from. And the public can feel that tension. According to reporting from Variety, representatives for Savannah have declined to comment on the alleged ransom note connected to her mother's disappearance. That silence isn't unusual in an active investigation. Law enforcement often asks families not to speak publicly to avoid compromising leads. But emotionally, that silence is loud, because people expect reaction. They expect a plea, a statement, a visible expression of fear or anger. Instead, they see professionalism. They see someone continuing to do her job while carrying a private storm. That contrast is jarring. Viewers watching the morning news know that behind the camera, Savannah may be waiting for updates from detectives, waiting for lab results, waiting for a phone call that could change everything. Every segment she hosts may be happening in the shadow of that waiting, and that human element is impossible to separate from the investigation. Public figures don't get to disappear from view during crises. Their lives unfold in front of an audience. Every expression is analyzed. Every absence noticed. Every appearance becomes part of the narrative. Investigators understand that spotlight. They know high-profile cases attract attention that can both help and hurt. On one hand, publicity keeps the story alive and may bring in tips. On the other, it invites speculation, rumors, and false leads that consume time and resources. Savannah's restraint helps law enforcement in one key way. It avoids fueling unverified information. No emotional press conferences. No public accusations. No statements that could box investigators into a corner. Just quiet cooperation behind the scenes. But that doesn't make it easier emotionally. Imagine trying to focus on your job while knowing your phone could ring at any second with life-changing news. Imagine reading headlines about your own family. Imagine strangers debating possibilities online while you sit in silence because you've been asked to trust the process. That's the reality Savannah Guthrie is living right now. And it raises another dimension of this case. The psychological toll on families during investigations that stretch over days, weeks, or longer. The waiting becomes its own form of trauma. Every passing hour brings new fear. Every development brings hope that can quickly collapse into uncertainty again. Meanwhile, investigators have to balance compassion with procedure. They keep families informed when they can, but they can't share everything. Some details must stay confidential to protect the case. That can feel like distance at a time when families crave clarity. It's a painful but necessary line. Savannah's situation is unique in another way too. She understands media dynamics better than most. She knows how stories spread. She knows how speculation grows. She knows how quickly a narrative can take shape before facts are confirmed. That awareness can make the experience even heavier, knowing how much is being said and how little of it she can address. It also means she understands why law enforcement is moving carefully, why they won't confirm the ransom note, why they won't reveal suspect information, why they won't speculate about motive. Because once something is said publicly, it can't be taken back. Behind the scenes, Savannah and her family are likely in close communication with investigators, receiving updates that never make headlines. But from the outside, all the public sees is composure, professionalism, silence. And that silence leaves room for questions. How is she holding up? What has investigators' tone been in private briefings? Are there developments they can't share yet? Those questions linger because this case sits at the intersection of personal tragedy and public attention. For law enforcement, that means extra pressure to get it right. Mistakes in high-profile cases don't just affect investigations, they affect trust. Every step must be careful, every decision weighed. At the same time, detectives are human. They see the family's pain. They know this isn't abstract. It's a mother, a daughter, a family, waiting for resolution. That emotional weight fuels urgency. But urgency can't override method. So investigators continue their work, analyzing evidence from the home, tracing digital leads, evaluating the alleged ransom message, and building a clearer picture of Nancy Guthrie's final known movements. And Savannah continues showing up to work, a public face in a private crisis. That dual reality, professional calm and personal fear, mirrors the investigation itself. On the surface, measured updates. Behind the scenes, constant motion. The public sees fragments. Detectives see data. Families feel every second. Right now, Savannah Guthrie's role in this story isn't as a journalist, but as a daughter caught in a nightmare she didn't choose. Her reaction, quiet, controlled, and largely unseen, is part of the emotional core of this case. But investigators can't pause to process emotion, because even as the spotlight stays on Savannah, detectives are chasing something else. A lead they haven't discussed publicly, a thread that could connect the physical evidence, the digital trail, and the unanswered question of motive. And what they decide to do with that lead next could determine where this investigation goes from here. Savannah Guthrie is still living in limbo, and investigators are now reacting to a lead they haven't publicly explained. A thread in the evidence that could quietly reshape the entire direction of the search for Nancy Guthrie. While headlines focus on the alleged ransom message and the crime scene inside the home, detectives are pursuing something more specific behind closed doors. Because major cases often turn on details the public never sees coming, law enforcement rarely reveals their most promising leads in real time. Doing so risks alerting a suspect, contaminating witness memories, or triggering someone involved to change behavior. So when officials go quiet, it doesn't mean nothing is happening. Sometimes it means something very important is. Right now, investigators are believed to be zeroing in on evidence that links multiple pieces of this case together. The physical scene at Nancy's home, the digital data surrounding her disappearance, and the unusual behavior pattern of the alleged ransom communication. One possibility detectives explore in cases like this involves unidentified DNA. Authorities have already said samples were collected from the home, and that some results have come back without identifying a suspect. But no match doesn't mean no value. It can mean the DNA belongs to someone not in a criminal database, someone with no prior record, someone who has never been arrested. That shifts the search from known offenders to unknown individuals. Investigators may now be working to build a profile from whatever forensic material they have: partial prints, trace fibers, skin cells, or other biological evidence. Even a small sample can sometimes narrow possibilities by gender, ancestry markers, or links to other unsolved cases. And here's where things get interesting. If forensic evidence suggests the presence of someone who had no legitimate reason to be in Nancy's home, detectives begin building a behavioral picture. Was this person careful? Did they try to clean up? Did they move through the house with purpose or hesitation? Crime scene behavior can reveal whether an offender was experienced, impulsive, panicked, or methodical. Those behavioral clues then get compared to the digital trail. Remember the cell tower data and vehicle movements investigators have been mapping? A promising lead could emerge when forensic timing aligns with a suspicious device or vehicle passing through the area at the exact right moment. It only takes one overlap. One phone that appeared near the house during the critical window and then traveled somewhere unusual. One vehicle captured on camera that doesn't belong in the neighborhood. One data point that connects a physical trace to a digital presence. That's often how cases pivot from mystery to suspect. But there's another possibility investigators quietly consider. Someone returning to the scene, physically or digitally. Offenders sometimes revisit locations, follow news coverage obsessively, or even insert themselves into investigations through tips or messages. That's why the alleged ransom note isn't being dismissed outright. Even if it's fake, it could still come from someone connected to the crime, unable to stay away from the spotlight. Investigators analyze language patterns in messages like that. Word choice, tone, technical knowledge, mistakes. Every detail can hint at education level, familiarity with cryptocurrency, or emotional state. They may compare it to known communications from individuals already on their radar. Meanwhile, Savannah Guthrie continues waiting as this complex web tightens behind the scenes. Every time authorities say little publicly, it could mean they're protecting progress. But for a family, silence never feels like progress. It feels like distance. And yet, detectives have to move this way, because acting too soon on a weak lead can destroy a strong case later. They need corroboration. They need consistency. They need evidence that holds up not just in public opinion, but in court. So what does a break actually look like at this stage? It might not be an arrest announcement. It might be a quiet shift. Surveillance on a person of interest. A search warrant for a vehicle. A forensic retest. Or a deeper dive into someone's digital history. These steps often happen long before the public knows a suspect exists. And here's the key tension. Investigators may be closer to a person than the public realizes, but still not close enough to act. That's the uncomfortable middle ground in major cases. Too much evidence to ignore. Not enough to move decisively. So detectives keep building, layer by layer, data point by data point. They revisit interviews, recheck alibis, rerun lab work, rewatch footage. They look for inconsistencies, small cracks in someone's story that widen under pressure. And all the while, the question driving everything remains the same. Where is Nancy Guthrie? Every lead is measured against that goal. Does this help locate her? Does this move us toward her? Or does it only explain part of what happened without bringing her home? That's why investigators don't just chase suspects. They chase locations, rural properties, storage units, remote roads, places a vehicle could have gone after leaving her neighborhood. If a digital trail points somewhere specific, search resources can shift quickly. This is where the investigation becomes a race between information and time. Savannah Guthrie may not know the details of this emerging lead, but she knows something is happening. Families can sense when cases shift, when law enforcement tone changes slightly, when updates become more careful, when investigators ask more pointed questions. That shift may be happening now. Detectives are reaching a moment where they must decide how to act on what they've gathered. Do they watch longer, hoping to strengthen the case? Or do they move now, risking that a suspect might react unpredictably? That decision, surveillance or intervention, is often the most delicate step in an investigation. Because once you move, the suspect moves too. And what investigators choose to do next with this developing lead could be the moment that finally changes the direction of the search for Nancy Guthrie. Savannah Guthrie is still waiting, and investigators are still moving, even when the public can't see every step. What began as a missing person report has grown into a layered, complex investigation filled with physical evidence, digital trails, unanswered questions, and one painful constant reality. Nancy Guthrie is still not home. That's where everything stands right now. At the beginning of this story, we saw the shock ripple outward. A daughter known to millions learning her mother had vanished under suspicious circumstances. Then came the discovery inside the house. Signs of forced entry, blood, and the quiet horror of personal belongings left behind. That was the moment this stopped being a search and became a criminal investigation. From there, the mystery widened. A message claiming to demand millions in cryptocurrency surfaced, adding urgency and confusion. Investigators had to treat it as potentially real without fully trusting it. Was it a genuine attempt at ransom, or a distraction sent by someone watching the case unfold? Even now, that question remains unresolved. Meanwhile, detectives mapped the invisible world around Nancy's home. Surveillance cameras, cell phone tower data, vehicle tracking systems. They built timelines not just of Nancy's final known hours, but of everything moving around her during that critical window. Each piece of data either narrowed possibilities or opened new ones. And through it all, one truth never changed. Nancy Guthrie is an 84-year-old woman with medical needs that make time incredibly important. That urgency hangs over every part of this case. Investigators have made it clear they are not treating this as a routine situation. They are coordinating across agencies, analyzing forensic evidence, reviewing digital patterns, and following leads the public may never hear about, unless they result in an arrest or rescue. The process can feel slow from the outside, but each step must be careful. Rushing risks mistakes. And mistakes in a case like this can cost more than time. Emotionally, the weight of this story is impossible to ignore. A home that should have been safe became a crime scene. A routine evening turned into a national mystery. A family's private fear became public conversation. For Savannah Guthrie, this is not a headline. It is the daily reality of waking up without knowing where her mother is, or what condition she might be in. That human element is what makes this case resonate so deeply. But emotion alone cannot solve it. Facts will. Right now, here is what is known. Nancy disappeared under circumstances authorities consider suspicious. Evidence inside her home indicates a possible struggle. An alleged ransom message exists, but has not been verified as authentic. No suspects have been publicly named. No motive has been confirmed. Investigators are working with both physical and digital evidence, and the search remains active. And here is what remains uncertain: where Nancy is, whether she is being held, whether the ransom message is connected, and why this happened in the first place. Those unknowns define the current moment. In cases like this, progress often happens quietly before it becomes visible. A lab result links evidence to a person. A camera angle reveals a license plate. A tip leads to a location. These breakthroughs don't come with warning. They arrive suddenly after days or weeks of unseen work. That is why investigators continue urging the public to stay alert. Someone may have seen something that didn't seem important at the time. A vehicle parked where it didn't belong. Movement at an unusual hour. A stranger in the area. Memory can be powerful when paired with timing. The smallest overlooked detail can become the missing piece. At the same time, responsible attention matters. Speculation, rumors, and online theories can create noise that distracts from real leads. This case is not entertainment. It is an active investigation involving a vulnerable person and a family in distress. Sharing confirmed information and official updates helps. Spreading unverified claims does not. As we reach this point in the story, everything circles back to the same place it began. A daughter reacting to the sudden, frightening disappearance of her mother, and investigators responding with the full weight of their resources. The next phase of this case depends on action.